Welcome to I'm Still Here, a podcast on making art after kids. I'm Mary Atkins.
And I'm Kate Tellers, and we're parents who are also people who make art.
What do we mean by art, Kate?
Creative stuff.
Exactly.
Yes.
Today we are here with Gregg Lachow, which is also pronounced differently by different members of your family.
How's it pronounced?
Well, I say Lachow. That's how it's brought up. But some people say Lachow.
Well, who are the some people?
My son's a rapper, and he says Lachow because it rhymes with a lot more things. So since he's better known than I am, it's slowly becoming, that's my last name.
Well, we're so happy to have you here. You mentioned your son. So let's talk about our kids a little bit.
Let's see. I have two boys. One's about 27, and the other's about 19.
Wow, a lot older than our kids.
Yeah.
So you can tell us everything about what's going to happen next.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't want to spoil it for you.
Yeah.
How are they about 27 and 19?
I have this thing about age. So, I don't say my age, which everyone I know hates me for. And so I always approximate people's ages as part of that thing of why are we pinning each other down on how close to death we are.
Oh, so your way of not really believing in age is to approximate ages.
Or just not talk about them. Which so far this podcast has been about the two things I don't talk about.
Yeah.
How to pronounce my name and how old are you.
So glad you're having a great time.
Yeah.
And Gregg, what do you make?
I want to know your income. I want to know everything you don't.
My income, I have no problem. I'll tell you to the penny. I make films and theater pieces, mostly those also interweave film together with the live theater and music and dance.
And you currently have a web series.
Right. So now I have a web series, which I try to find another name for, like a TV show. And then when they say what TV station, I say YouTube. Just because as soon as you say web series, either everyone goes blank or they assume it's a documentary about someone who murdered someone and you're trying to find the real killer or something. I don't know. No one, who wants to watch a web series on YouTube? It sounds so...
That's funny.
That's going to be horrible.
I assume it's going to be a comedy.
Really?
Yeah, I assume low production comedy.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a low production comedy on YouTube called The Uncertain Detective, and I've been doing that for the last 3 years, which in a certain way is like a completely new adventure for me and also a culmination of many years, I won't say how many, of learning how to make film, which I think I'm still at the very beginning of after many, many years. Yeah, it's such a complicated field. I feel like a complete amateur when I'm making my show, which is cool because I'm learning something every time I do it.
Can you talk about how you got into film in the first place? Because you've told me that before, and I think it's interesting.
Ooh, what did I say?
What is interesting about me?
Just say whatever you think.
I can tell you the first time I shot. So when I was 20, someone who was a friend of a friend who was successful in Hollywood told me, "Too late. You're too old to start in film." And for some reason, I believed him.
When you were 20?
Yeah, 20 or maybe 21.
No wonder you don't believe in age.
Yeah. And I didn't shoot any film for years. I just did theater, even though I really wanted to try film. And then when I was 29, I shot my first roll of Super 8 film. So you would shoot it, wait for it to come back, and then unspool it from the reel and kind of try to see what it was before you put it into your little Super 8 editor. And it was so magical feeling that I could see the thing that I'd shot on the film reel. It was really such a... oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing moment. I doubt that's the story I told you, but that's my first exposure to film. So that was long ago when you actually shot film.
You felt like it was something you would never master.
Oh, yeah. So by the time I was 29, I'd done a lot of theater. And I kind of felt, this is embarrassing to admit, I kind of felt like I understood theater. I'm sort of good at this, Silly. But I do think theater is basically about one thing, which is what is it like to be with other people? That's what, to me, every Shakespeare play is and every theatrical experience is. And I felt, okay, I explore that for the rest of my life. And then when I shot that roll of film and started doing stuff, I realized this is about like 18 infinite million things, and I'll never get like past the beginning of it. And I kind of decided I want to explore that more, like feel like I don't know anything for a long time.
And then you made a few feature films, right?
Yeah, so at first I shot lots and lots of short Super 8 films and interwove them with a lot of our theater pieces. And often we would do all the dialogue live, all the music live, all the effects live, and it was pretty cool.
Who was we?
So I worked with my wife, Megan Murphy, and a sort of core group of people in Seattle, Washington, including my kids. And then, so then I decided I wanted to make a few feature films just to see if that was a thing for me. And I didn't really wind up loving the form and didn't feel like that was what I wanted to keep doing, which was a little too bad because that's where the money is eventually, or hopefully, I guess. So then I started making really weird stuff so then I moved to video. So I went 8, Super 8, 16, Super 16, 35, and then went to video, like literally video, I guess, before digital. And then just started making weird stuff digitally. And I've been sort of in that digital world ever since. Still do theater, still interweave stuff with it, but mostly on this TV show on YouTube now.
And your family's has been in your work for a long time, right?
Yeah, so my wife and I work together quite a lot. She's the best actor I've ever worked with. She's a creative artist in her own right, and way more creative artisty than me, I think. That's a compliment.
What do you mean by that?
Like when I see what she does, it's sort of like, oh, my mind is like, you can feel the ocean in your brain. You know, you're like, there are connections between things that you would never think to make connections, and it just feels right.
Yeah.
And I don't get to have that about my work. It always feels like, whew, barely got that one over the finish line.
What does she work with? She acts.
Yeah, as a creator, she puts people in a room and so it's generative art, right? You sort of generate the piece out of what's going on in the room with the people. And often it's people who aren't dancers who dance and aren't necessarily even actors. She mixes sort of professionals and non in an interesting way. So we started introducing our kids into the work. So our oldest, Sam, was very shy. So I was thinking about this podcast on the way here, and one thing that occurred to me was, as a parent, you kind of get this feeling of, oh, part of my job is to protect or shield, but also expose, like that both, right? And it's an interesting challenge. So apropos of that, our firstborn was clearly never going to be on stage. He was very shy and very reluctant to do anything in front of anyone. And so it made sense to me to see if he wanted to be in our shows, because it was clearly an experience he would never get to have as a grown-up. Now he's a performer. But he's a performer with great stage fright. So in my defense, I was right.
He's the rapper.
He's the rapper. But then Charlie came along, and he really clearly was like meant to be a performer. So we didn't put him in any of our stuff, actually, for years and years. He asked, and we said no.
Why'd you say no?
Well, I don't think kids should be doing grown-up things like that. I don't think it's healthy for the most part. So it also seemed like something that Charlie might eventually do. And I felt like, well, yeah, you can do that on your own when you decide you want to do it. But I don't, as a parent, feel like I am serving you to, like, that's not part of the, let me introduce this to you so that you know it's there, but you'll never do it again, that kind of thing.
My parents didn't let me try out for the Mickey Mouse Club, and I was so angry. So furious about it.
Why didn't they let you try out?
I'm sure because of this reason. Like, what was
Yeah.
I going to do if I got in the Mickey Mouse Club? We were going to move to Orlando and I'd be on a TV show. I mean, no, they weren't going to do that.
She said, rolling her eyes. And then I would, what? Then I'd just be super famous?
Anyway, back to Gregg.
Wait, I want to go way back to Gregg. What was the subject of your first film? Like, what did you start expressing or doing or exploring with film?
Well, the first films I made were all Super 8 films, so no sound, and they were almost always interwoven into some kind of performance thing that we'd do at cabarets and clubs, and then that evolved into doing them in big performance venues in the U.S. and abroad. So the first film I made that was a standalone... Oh, it was a thing that I was commissioned to make for the PBS station out in the Northwest. And it was an 8-minute film, and it was basically about two people who's had a kid who was about 1.5 and wouldn't go to sleep, and they finally get him to sleep, and they have like an hour with the babysitter to go run to the, to drive to the beach and see the sunset, and they get in this big giant fight, and the husband, played by me, refuses to drive unless the fight's over. And the wife's like, the sun is setting, And we shot it in the studio with live orchestra, mini orchestra of 6 players behind us. And you see us watching the film while also being in the film. Impossible to explain. But it's basically about a marriage with kids and how hard that is. So apropos...
Were you married with kids at this time?
Yeah. I played the husband. My wife played the wife. And Sam played the kid.
I want to see it.
Yeah, I don't want you to see it. I'll have to find. I don't know. I started it theatrically, where if you wanted to see something, you came and saw it, and there was no other way to see it. And then people wanted you to submit videotapes of your performance so you could win grants and all that kind of stuff. And you quickly realize, well, the videotape captures everything, but the only thing that makes this good, like that's completely missing. So I stopped doing that. And I think that kind of fed into my somewhat reluctance to put my work out there outside of the context of it's playing at this festival or this theater or whatever. I think just my theater background leads me to, but we should all be in the room together watching it, which is, a bit shooting yourself in the foot. And I went so far as to make a 35 millimeter feature that we toured around. Sam was in, he was 10. He still quotes lines from it. That you could only see in the room because it was like an 1.5-hour feature based on this Delmore Schwartz short story, which I meant to tell you. If you haven't read, you should. I know you'll love it. But all the dialogue was done live, all the music was done live, and all the effects were done live. So it was a feature film, but it basically changed every time you watched it, right, in subtle ways. And when we performed it first, it was at this 2,500-seat theater in Seattle, because we were commissioned by the film festival to make it. And then we brought it here to New York, among other places, and it was like a 50-seat room, same piece. So it was really different depending on how you saw it. And I loved that. Like, I loved that if you want to see this, you have to be in the room.
And you stopped doing those?
I mean, we got back together with our kids. Some of the people who had done this got back together in 2015 and made what I think is our best piece. And Sam was in it. Charlie was kind of the star. So that was Charlie's first, oh, you're old enough now that you want to be, and he really wanted to be in it, and we'd always said no. So he came, and we do, our stuff is strange and just idiosyncratic to us. And most of the time when we work with people who haven't worked with us, we either have to say, this isn't working out, or we have to work really hard everyone has to work hard to be working on the same piece, right? Like, our approach is idiosyncratic. Charlie was like a fish in water. Like, day one, he was completely riding the wave of what we do. And by the end, it was like everyone involuntarily turned to Charlie when there was a question or what do we do next? It was crazy. We did his Q&A after, and the Q&A guy ended it with, so why don't we go around the room and everybody say 3 words that you think this piece was about? All the participants.
What was the piece really quickly? Like what? Can you kind of describe it?
You're seeing a theater piece that has lots of dancing and live music and film. I cannot describe it beyond that, but that's what it is. So Charlie said, I'll go first. And I wish I could remember the 3 words, but he said the 3 words, and then we all kind of looked at it. It was like a real drop the mic moment. Like we were all like, okay, no one else wanted to follow that. And the guy said, okay, that'll wrap it up. So none of the others had to do it because he hit the exact right 3 words. And it was beautiful. You know. Yeah.
And he was like about 16.
He was probably 16, 15, maybe 16.
Do you always collaborate with your wife?
Not always, but a lot. She's done a lot of stuff without me. I haven't done a lot of stuff without her. But it doesn't feel like a collaboration with my wife. Right. It feels like I tend to just grab whatever's around, and that's what we're going to make the piece out of. That sound terrible? She's just this thing that happens to be around.
She happens to sleep in proximity to me, so.
I'm more interested in like what making work out of what happens to be around me. I'm not very interested in what's inside my head. That is not humble bragging. It doesn't interest me, and I don't feel like I have something I have to say or express. And so it's more what's around, and let's get to work making some stuff out of what's here. So I do tend very much to work with the people who happen to be around. So it feels more like that. In the web show, Charlie's kind of the star. I think he's pretty phenomenal, and he plays my character's son. Mm-hmm. You haven't seen any of it, right? Mm-mm. So he plays my character's son, and I'm just like I can't get him to do it that much because he's got his own world and his own life and everything. But whenever I get the chance to have him be in it, it's a happy time for me because I love writing for him. I know he's going to turn it into something good. He always makes it better. It's pretty like miraculous.
I have to say, so. A couple of years ago, I was working on a story with a woman who is a nun, and she was describing the moment where she decided to join the convent. She was never a plan in her life. Her friends were she was going to marry her boyfriend.
Like one day, she's just, this is the thing.
So she goes with her friend who's going to be a nun. They're seniors in high school. She goes with her friend to volunteer. They were going to sing songs for people who are dying, and she watches the nuns care for people who are dying. And she said, I found in that the pearl of great price, which is the line that has always stuck with me. It's the thing we all pursue. It's like that, that's it. The most valuable thing in the world. What is that to you?
Pearl of great price?
Yes. And what you describe of that is that like symbiosis of like a closeness with your family and your kids, but like a creative energy that like gives you joy. It's like that is the pearl of that is right. It. This is the second time in my life I've met the pearl of great price.
Thank you, because you remind me of something. You know how it is when you're making work. You go through these deep troughs together with, I'm in a bit of a trough at the moment, but maybe tomorrow will be. But anyway, you remind me that long ago I was in therapy and my therapist asked me to sort of like, what makes you happy? Yeah. And I told him this vision that I'd had, which may have been a dream. I don't remember. I think it was a dream. And it was very simple. I was in this big like loft painting. I'm not a painter at all. And the world was swirling around me. And I was just painting what was going on around me onto the canvas, which itself was sort of like spilling back into the world. It was I woke up and I was like, that was so beautiful. And that's what ever since I was like, I wish I could do that. And then every so often, thank you for this, I remember, I kind of am trying to do that without remembering, like unconsciously trying to do that. But every so often I look at what I'm doing and think, oh, lucky you. Yeah. You're basically doing that thing, I got to remind myself of that more often.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's for me, as I said before, my kids are much younger than yours. They're 1 and 3.5. But for me, particularly like with your first kid, you're learning all the things about being a parent. But those moments when you realize like, this is so fun. This person is showing me a new way to see the world. This person is like, it's not me caring for and keeping another life alive. It's this life that is illuminating and magnifying mine. And there's like a give and take and a symbiosis that like has blown my mind. It just blew my mind with my son. And it happened very early on. They're like this, useless little ball of, useless is weird. I don't want him to be like a sponge. Like, why won't he clean my table?
I tried to clean.
But he's not absorbent. But I mean, like, they're, these dependents, but very early on, you just watch like the kids take in the life that you're sharing with them and show you something in it that you didn't see.
So I have a story about
before.
that.
I'm dying to hear.
So it's funny, my kids are so far apart, I can never remember which one it was. Interestingly, they both had best friends who were girls. Sam's best friend, who was a girl, who he's known since he's 2.5, they're still best friends.
Oh.
Yeah. This was Charlie. So they were about 4, sitting down, making grilled cheese. And comes time to pour the apple juice, and I realize, oh, God, there's a blue cup and a red cup. There's going to be a fight. And I was in no mood. So I put the cheese down, I put the cups down, and one of them says, I want the blue cup, and the other one says, I want the blue cup. And I said, it doesn't matter what color the cup is! And they both sort of froze and looked up at me like I was an alien. One of them said, yes, it does. And it struck me like they're so in tune to the only things that matter. Of course it matters what color the cup, like what's more important in a certain way, that kind of thing. So, yeah. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it's absolutely that. Well, I always think of like when when you first stroll kids, we had like a car seat stroller, so they're facing up. And that was amazing because I'd stroll Fritz and I'd see him see the way the trees moved, and you'd watch like suddenly, and they're just learning to see and they're finding the joy in that. But then it was right around this time of year that we flipped him and he faced out, and it started getting dark earlier. So he was awake when it was dark. And it was around the holidays, and I watched him like see headlights and just like explode with joy and like just see like I'm like trudging around our Brooklyn neighborhood thinking like, I just need to get this kid out and make sure he's happy. And he's just he's seeing everything for the first time. And it made me see my neighborhood and like my surroundings for the first time.
So that's connected to this argument I had with a friend that's about whether kids are artists, whether kids can be artists. And I think no, kids aren't artists, because my sort of definition of an artist is someone who struggles to reconnect to what they once knew. And kids, it's sort of automatic. Like, of course it matters what color. Like, it's not even a question. And they're right. They're attuned to the things that are important. But they haven't gone through puberty and sort of crossed onto the other side and had to now wake up in a completely different place. And that's what, making art is, I think, is like on a daily basis almost trying to rediscover something you once knew and then find a way to report it back to the world so that they can have that kind of recognition. And kids don't have that struggle.
Yeah.
And that struggle is what art is, I think. And I think my now sort of 19-year-old is going through that, recognizing that what came easily to him, because he can draw. He was just sort of brilliant at drawing, like, oh, that's so cool and interesting. And now it's not as, he's going through, like, the struggle. And he may become something other than an artist, who knows? But he's going to have to go through that struggle, and it's going to have to be hard, and it's going to have to fail, I think, if he wants to eventually come out to a place where he can make something that, or work on art in a way that feels satisfying to him.
What was your world prior to these children? And like, what was the world that you created for them? That's like an hour-long question. You understand that? Please do a solo show about your life.
My kids were born into a world of artists, and I don't think I was ever even aware of that, except when someone asked and I described it. I was like, that's interesting. My brother's a singer-songwriter. My sister's a dancer. My mom's a dancer. My dad was a playwright and an actor. Megan's mom is a great painter. Megan's brother's an actor. Megan's sister, like when I name all these people, my sister's a dancer. Like, what? It doesn't occur to me that because none of us are famous in any way. None of us are like known for what we do. So we don't think, I just naturally think of us differently, I guess. But they were born into that. This is what we do world, I think. completely unconsciously. Never occurred to me that it would be anything, but I don't know what I'm saying. So I was thinking about that. Like, does Sam make music because he was born into that world, or would he have made music? Would Bach have made music if he wasn't Bach's kid? You know, I think it's both, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the kind of, my job as a parent is to shield, but also to, what was that other word I used? Expose, yeah. You know, and I wish I'd done more. Like, I feel very lucky in a certain way that Sam grew up to be, well, first of all, the wonderful person that he is, but also that he's lucky, right? That he gets to do what he most wants to do. Because parenting is just so filled with guilt in so many ways. Like, there's so many missteps that are completely inevitable, and no one knows what's right anyway. So every step you take is both right and wrong. And, you know, early on, if someone would compliment my kid, I would say, I don't have anything to do with it. And I think people would think, again, like humble brag or false modesty or something. But I recognize pretty early, if I say, oh, thanks, then what do I say when they say your kid's a fuck up? Oh, sorry, I can't do it.
Yeah, you can. It's our podcast.
Pioneers.
Oh, we're pioneers.
We don't know. This is a podcast about swearing fuckers, so.
But you get what I'm saying. Like, am I responsible for that too? No, I don't think probably I am any more than I am for the good. So I don't know where I was going.
So what do you say when people compliment your kids?
I don't know. Try it. Compliment my kid.
Your kids are so talented.
Oh, that's cool. We were friends with someone Sam's age, I think his firstborn. And they suggested, why don't we sit each other's kids and then we'll get to have dates with our spouse. And I think they went first. It must be the case that they went first because I wouldn't.
Wait, they went first babysitting or dating?
They babysat. Okay. We went date. So then it was our turn. It was me. I don't remember where Megan was, but I was watching the kids. And I was fine changing the diapers. FYI, audience, I was like a 50-50 partner for both of our kids. Like, that's just how it worked out. So anyway, good diaper changer, you know. Yeah. Then I had to change the diaper of not my kid, which I'd never done. And it was really one of the worst experiences of all time.
Why?
Because it smelled so bad and it was so much poop. You just don't notice it when you do it your own, right? And then this kid that you don't really know does it. Yeah. And you're like, it felt like when I was a freshman in college, my work study job was cleaning the toilets of the upperclassmen. Like, it felt so wrong and so unfair.
One of my first temp jobs was at a daycare. I'd never taken care of kids. Nowhere. I took a typing test. Like, nowhere did I say, like, I know anything about kids. I'm 22, 21, whatever. And they put me in the baby room. And then they were just handing me babies, and they were like, change the diaper. I know. And so I was like, well, I guess I can figure out, like, I can tell a diaper, like, part goes in the front. I can see because the baby has the diaper on. And these tabs must do it. And these wipes must be what you wipe, presumably. Like, literally, I was, like, walking myself through the logic of changing diapers. Can you believe
this?
That?
This is horrifying. I wonder if this still happens.
And I also remember there was one kid that in hindsight was trying to nurse on me. But back then I was like, this kid thinks I'm so sexy.
Oh my God.
Because the kid kept trying to lift up my, like, I just didn't understand parenting at all. So the kid would, like, look at me and be like, and lift up my shirt, and I'd be like, no, young child. I have a boyfriend. And I thought it was like a funny game.
Oh my God, you knew nothing about children. Why did they assign you to a daycare?
Can you imagine now as a parent?
Like,
Holly
Hughes, what was the Holly Hughes yesterday
play
at
that
the
she was
temp
known for?
agency?
Anyway, I was doing, like, Holly Hughes plays at night, like, in Boston, and like getting drunk on cheap beer, and then going in and being like, what is a diaper? Like, why is this baby flirting with me?
Yeah, they're like, oh, this is a young woman. She'll be great in a daycare.
Yeah, I know. We could really get in. We could really unpack that.
So in the past week, I returned to something I haven't done in years, which is try to apply for grants and this and that through my art. And it was completely understanding and remembering why I don't do it. And I wound up, like, putting all the time in, and the resume and the letters of recommendation and my artist statement and, you know, all those things. And then I just couldn't hit. enter, and so I didn't do it. You folks asking me to sort of think about being an artist in relationship to kids is so much more like a natural way of asking artists or just talking about what we do than this horrible thing that they always ask you to do when you apply for grants and stuff. It's really, I thought it was me, like, bad me, I can't hit enter and I can't win these grants. Oh, this is interesting. I won a lot of grants before I had a kid.
Yeah. I wanted to know a little bit about your
And then I kind of
bestiality.
stopped doing it. That's interesting. I wonder why.
Why couldn't you hit enter now?
It just felt so wrong. Like, I didn't believe what I had written. They ask you, your artist statement. I don't know what my artist statement is. It feels so phony to me. And what do you want to do when you get to Rome? I don't know yet. That's like 9 months from now or a year from now. And then I looked up what the past winners had said we're doing. And it was so smart and together and connected and, And I knew that if I made something like that, which could at least get me in the running or whatever, that it would be false. I don't know why I'm saying all this. Oh, just because as I was coming here today, I was like, we're going to talk about, I don't like talking about myself. And I don't like talking about my art and how I make it because I don't even think of myself as an artist. And then I realized, we're going to talk about it in the context of life and being a parent and having kids. And isn't that how I love that. So yay, I guess I'm complimenting you. It's a nice thing.
Yeah.
I guess you sort of hinted on it with like the grants. So first question, you met your wife as artists or did you?
I was running a weekly cabaret, and I went to this other performance venue to see what was out there and see if there was anyone I wanted to invite to what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And she was a dancer in a piece, and I'm sure I was just attracted to her and wanted to meet her, but I talked to her about possibly doing something for my thing. And that's how we met.
And for how long, how quickly did you start collaborating?
Shortly after we started dating, not too super long after we started dating, she went to Europe for 2 years to be in a company over there, a European company that was touring all over. And when she came, I think I did something with her once on one of my visits, we made a 5-minute something, but it wasn't until she came back that I was already working in a collaborative way with a group, and she joined the group.
So you have this company, this creative collaboration with this group of people, including Megan.
So Sam was in, his first show when he was in Megan's womb, and she was weekend 1 of our show. No one knew she was pregnant, and weekend 2, everyone was like, "Whoa, she's pregnant!" It all just, how that can happen, right?
Yeah.
It became a really different show from 1 week to the next because this major character was pregnant the same week, not the first. So he was born, almost literally born into it. He was on stage when he was 6 months, probably, in one of our shows.
And how long were you a couple without children before you were a couple with children?
2.5 years, maybe.
And what did it feel like to anticipate that transition?
It wasn't we were living apart the entire time. Megan came back from Europe pregnant, presumably with my child.
Yeah, I was like, I'm going to let you.
It made it sound like it was not with your child.
I'm going to let you.
I'm not sure how. I hadn't been there in a couple of years, but you never know how these things work.
So she came back.
So the first time we lived together, she was pregnant. Mm-hmm. So now we're empty nesters.
Yeah.
And this is our first time living together without kids in the womb or outside of the womb.
What's it
in
like?
The house. It is. I'm not sure yet. It's new. It's only a few months. We're both sort of looking at each other like, what is this like?
Yeah.
I miss my kids, and she does too. So that's just built into what's going on in our relationship is that we're 3,000 miles from our kids, and we don't like that. So yeah, so Sam was, now that, I don't normally talk about this, so I'm kind of thinking back wow, Sam was in all our stuff. When he was 10, he toured with us in this 35 millimeter film that he was the narrator, and it was a Delmore Schwartz short story.
Did you find it hard to transition into parenthood?
Oh yeah.
What was hard about it?
Just that sense of responsibility is so overwhelming. And like I say, in the moment, you don't realize, well, there's no right. And whatever you do will be both right and wrong. Like at all times, whatever you do, here's the binky. That's wrong, but that's also right. You know, like it doesn't matter what it is.
Like 7 hours after Finn was born, his sugar plummeted.
Ooh.
And a nurse scolded me. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, and she scolded me for not, feeding him, but I didn't know how to. I tried to nurse him. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just basing it on what I saw in the movies. I didn't know when to stop. And I thought, I felt so guilty. I was just sitting there holding him after she left, thinking, I have already almost killed this baby who's been alive for 7 hours. And I was like, I saw my whole life before me, and I was like, I'm going to feel guilty for the rest of my life. When we started talking about this podcast, I was really coming at it from the direction of talking to people. I was assuming a lot of the conversation would be kids in conflict with making stuff.
Right. I saw the title of the podcast, and I was like, oh, that's very specific. I'm not sure that's me.
Well, that's what that had been my experience so far. I was like, I'm having trouble finding time, finding energy, finding interest in making stuff now that I have a kid. Obviously, I'm very new to this, so that may just be the season of life that I've been in. And it's eased up as time has gone by. But in talking to Kate, I realized there was a whole other way of looking at it, which is, you said this better and then I'll say it, but how they complement each other and inform each other. And I think you are probably more than anyone I know, such an example of your family and your relationships with your children are really integrated into what you make.
Definitely. But I never consciously did that.
It just happened.
I mean, it grows out of the kind of art I like to make is, I wasn't ever, there are very few people I could say that influenced me. I like art, but I don't know who, but Andy Goldsworthy is this particular artist that I will point to and say, oh, when I read about him, I was like, oh, that's pretty great. You walk out the door and you find what's out there and you decide to make a piece out of the leaves and the grass and the lime on the frost that you find. I like that. That rings true to me.
Out of nature, and then they fade as nature changes.
Yeah. So that really did. That's a thing that rings true to me. For me, that makes me go, oh yeah, I like that. So my kids are the leaves in the grass naturally. They're part of what we do.
Something that's striking me as I think about it, as you were describing your extended family, that you come from, I think so much for me personally, but I think in the world, this idea of being an artist is we all accept we're going to be the starving artist and probably fail. It just feels like it's impossible. It's not practical, whatever, all of those things. But you come from a family where that's not, the accepted thing is not failure, that people are doing it.
Yeah, but barely, hanging on,
Right, but they're doing it, versus for me, it's a big challenge of how do I now with 2 children and, a mortgage, allow myself to sort of have the freedom and the presence of mind to do what I want to do with the realities of the world. But there's something in it, to me, listening to you about maybe it's the acceptance that you can and the understanding that you can or the modeling that you can, just being in a world where it's around you, whereas I perhaps wasn't. And I felt the way this is making me think is when I had my son, I was who's my first kid, I was really obsessed with proving to myself that I could. I was really proud of with travel. I traveled at 10 weeks and then I brought him on stage with me when he was 10 months old. And these are these things. And with my daughter, I was like, all right, I fucking can, but I'm tired. And I don't need to market in the same way. I don't think I had the easy symbiosis.
I think part of that easy though is when you're doing it. I was conscious the first time I made a feature film, which in film is months of work and super hard and money and all. And I was so conscious of how lucky I was that I didn't know what I was getting into. Because if I'd known what I was getting into, I wouldn't have attempted it. It's way too hard.
Yeah.
And realized pretty quickly, this is why people don't make a second feature film, So I think that's probably part of it too, is that you knew what you were asking of yourself and those around you if you decided to grab that kid and hit the road again, that second kid. I think that makes it hard.
Yeah.
Don't you?
And there's a second kid.
Well,
yeah, I think, and right, and I'm more tired because I have a first kid to take care of and this and everything else. But there definitely was like a desperation with kid one. Desperation is too big of a word for it, but like there was certainly like an energy with kid one that was like, don't lose yourself, Kate. Like
they're not going to write about me that I wrote my first novel when I was 68. Look at her, she could do it too.
I totally have had that.
Yeah,
I mean,
you had it sort of thrust upon you too, but yeah.
Like I found this journal I was keeping right after Finn was born. And 5 weeks after he was born, there's this entry that's like, just this, I'm in turmoil that I can't get back into the world of my novel and I need to care about these characters more. And I'm really just struggling to like get back into it. And I read it now and I'm like, I had a baby 5 weeks earlier, like cut myself some
That's
slack.
what I thought when I saw the podcast title. I was like, whoa, that was quick. I'm still here. Like, we haven't really missed you that much. Like, it's only been a few months.
That's
7 months and 2 days.
That's so Mary. That is so you, though, Mary.
Yeah,
You're
no,
like,
completely.
I have this idea. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it in the best way. And I'm like, yes, like I could have never. Yeah, I remember those early days, like feeding Fritzy.
I wanted to read like 4 days after your baby. I'm starting this podcast called I'm Still Here.
My baby tanked my career, but now it's back. So get it.
Yeah. That's so funny. Yeah, but I mean, I feel like, I know I'm just defending myself, but I do kind of feel like my whole pregnancy, I was already thinking of myself as a parent.
That's true too.
So it does kind of feel like I've been trying to juggle this for, I don't know, 9 plus 7 months, 16 months. Which is,
Still not a ton.
Still not a ton of time.
But I also think like a lot of the conversations that we've had with parents is exactly like the fear of losing identity, I think is a pretty common fear.
Well, partly I think just off the top of my head now is that whether you're 23 or 34 or 40 when you have your kid, those are the ages when you're most interested in like moving from a filmmaker to the filmmaker. Like, oh, there goes the filmmaker, Gregg, instead of he's a filmmaker. Like that's when you want to be recognized, right, for what you do. And so you're already like attuned to, is this happening? Isn't it happening? Am I becoming, the? And then the kid comes along and threatens that maybe. Yeah. Or just puts it into more stark relief.
Or competes it. Well, also I think there's this idea of, I mean, I had such tremendous love for my mother and respect and all of those things. But the idea of being defined solely as a mother prior to becoming a mother was not appealing to me at all. I just thought, well, but that's one facet of my life that could take over and be my entire identity because, which is strange because I have such, again, like love and respect for mothers. But there's, like the woman with juice boxes in her purse that Googles sippy cups for hours every night. I was super scared that it would take over my life. So I think that was it. Like, do I have another identity that's strong enough to stand when this avalanche comes at me?
Don't you also go ahead?
I was going to say, I super relate to that. And I think why we even started having the conversations that led to this podcast is because I sensed that fear in myself, and I'm at the beginning of this thing, and I wanted to hear from people who are doing it and have done it. Mm-hmm. And I Googled it. I was like, parents who are writers on how they write while being parents or whatever, because my Googling habits are not that concise.
Why are writers so interested in how hard it is to write? Like, I'm sure there were 1,000 entries on that, but if you substituted painters or filmmakers or anything else, there wouldn't have been.
There were not 1,000 entries on that.
Oh.
Like, I couldn't find anything. I really was actually just looking for hacks. I wanted people to be like, this is how I wrote this thing. I I was looking for an excuse to be like, to let myself off the hook. I was hoping I would find someone saying, I wrote this book in 20 minutes every morning. Right. And then I could be like, he did it. Not like I was.
But that's the thing. Like, you'll hear about how, Rocky Balboa, what's his name?
Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah. Like, he wrote that in 3 weeks. Like, you never hear that about a painter.
Right.
Like that's a thing, right? In writing, like how long did it take, and this and that, and there, if I go to the bookstore, there'll be 100 books on how to write and how hard it is to write. Just open a vein and pour out blood.
Right. Like why do I have
there's nothing like that for any other field.
You're right. Why do
That's
I have
true.
the factoid in my head that Toni Morrison wrote The Bluest Eye in 6 weeks?
Right.
Like why is that in my head as this achievement of hers?
But why is that? You're writers. I'm actually asking.
Because I'm terrible. It's awful. That's
so
why.
it's the art that people hate doing, and so they have to talk about how hard it is.
I don't know. Like, what is it? Because it's not like, I mean, I think with anything that I care enough about, particularly creative things, there is a period right before it is done that is horrible. It's like a moat.
Right, but that's true for all fields of art, though.
No, I'm saying, like, this is like the universal of anything. It's like I care. Then it gets super scary, and you have to like just push yourself through that ugly thing, and then you get to the other side. And it's the reason that we do this. I have a theory about that, by the way. What is your theory?
Oh, so if you're making good work, I think in order to make good work, you have to kind of dive pretty deep and find things that you can't find on the surface.
Yeah,
and then you come up to the surface and you figure out how to report what you found.
Yeah,
so, right. But if you're doing it well, you are discovering things that aren't at first glance all that clear or obvious or even worthwhile. It's only, until you find the way to present it. So the you tomorrow, it makes natural sense that you would wake up and look at it and go, oh, that's just shit.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's actually really good.
Yeah.
But you're not able to see what the you of yesterday who had worked for 5 hours getting to that place saw. I don't know. Does that make sense?
So how do you see it again? How does today?
You have to go through, like, this is what I love about how hard it is and cool it is to make art. Like, you ever read that book, The Autobiography of a Face? Good book.
Good title.
Yeah, well. But she has a line, I won't quote it right, but there's only 4 truths in the world. The hard part is you have to rediscover them every day. Kids don't, apropos of our earlier thing, but you wake up and you've forgotten the 4 truths. That's what makes life hard and interesting. And so it's analogous to that. Like, you've done all this work to get to, this is really good.
Yeah.
And because it's different from what's in the world, because you had to do all that work to get there, until you make that really good thing presentable so that everyone can just kind of go, oh, and feel it, it's going to appear to the you tomorrow as, no, this is stupid. Because you don't get the depth of it. You're not able to see, because it hasn't presented in a way yet that you can. And so you have to rediscover, oh, that's part, you go back in your studio and you rediscover it over and over. And it's hard.
The 2 things that I do, like from being on stage live and then from writing, both processes have like that pathos, is that the right word? Like that, turmoil or that. And I think for me, a lot of it is just vulnerability. It's like anyone's best work comes from, like a sort of rawness or a connectedness with whatever you're doing. But when you're writing, you're just typing into a screen. Whereas like if I'm on stage, I'm having a conversation, like you're getting validated the entire time, even if it's not, like applause or whatever. There's like a living energy where you're creating in the moment. Whereas you're writing, just putting dots on a page that at some point someone will look at in another context if it makes sense. Like, I think there's that. So you don't get the joy of sharing.
Like today I told my brother, I think I'm going to stop making my show, which I probably say every 2 weeks.
You do say that.
Yeah.
Every few months you say that to me.
I said, nobody's watching it. He said, you haven't told it. You have done nothing to promote it. I was like, I put it on Facebook. And he pointed out very nicely, like, there's a difference. He happens to be my biggest fan. He loves it. So he said, there's a difference between how good it is and how many people are watching it. Of course, intellectually, you understand that. But I'm with you, like, I wish I could find a way to make it feel more. And I fantasize about, like, I do 1 episode a week, ideally. In every episode, we'll have a cast party and we'll all get together and watch it together. Like, I'm very communal. I'm very collaborative, That ain't going to happen. So I'm with you.
I want to go back, though. This is not obviously, but in the forefront of my mind. Because Mary and I are talking about like our identities as artists and mothers. And I wonder if there's a difference between the expectations that we have for mothers versus fathers, or you have felt that. Like, do you feel like you've had Was there an expectation that things would be different for you or less so? Because I feel like for me, people were like, how are you going to do it?
Right.
Whereas I don't know that with my husband, people ask that question.
I mean, I'm sure that's true. You know, I mean.
Good, I'm right.
It's so. I mean, it is. So, you know, we know the world's unfair. My actually unfairness, which is totally minor, like compared to what Megan, for instance, would go through, is people just assume I don't do a lot of, when I was a kid, when my kids were young, just assumed I didn't do a lot of the parenting.
Yeah.
That was the automatic.
Lucas
and I'm like,
that.
I'm doing half the parenting here. It's hard work.
Jason gets that too.
And I feel like I can tell it bothers him. It bothers me on his behalf when he's doing so much work and he's also exhausted, and we decide to decompress by watching like one of these shows about new parents.
And the guy's always such a doofus and does nothing.
The jokes are about how bad the dads are.
Right.
And
a
lot of the jokes are generalizations about how bad dads are. Like, of course he doesn't, because he's the dad. And it's like, I just feel him next to me. He's like, I'm tired too, and just trying to relax and like have a nice time. And I have to listen to jokes like this.
So now I'm realizing it must have been harder for Megan than me when we would like tour with our kid, just in terms of what everyone's thinking, and especially like we went to Europe with our kid, and in that trip, Charlie was just like 2 or 3. He wasn't in the show, but that must have been much harder for her. The assumptions that went her way, and we haven't talked about any of this. She and I. I'll have to play the podcast.
Well, now you have time because you don't have your kids there.
Oh yeah, nothing but time.
Yeah,
not
let's
true
rehash
at all.
what it.
I have less time. I have to pay for college.
Oh,
different podcast.
Well,
we'll get there. Mary's already.
But that's part of it too, right? Like the feel. I was thinking about this earlier. One of you was saying something. And part of that, but it's my responsibility, is I got to make the money to make sure my kid has a roof and make sure this and that, you know. And there's nothing really all that fulfilling about feeling those feelings. And there's nothing artistic about feeling those feelings. Mm-hmm. Like, as an artist, I feel, they're completely separate. But you have to do both. And it is, that's hard.
Well, yeah, I think having a kid as an artist taps in 2 huge resources that you need as an artist. One of it is like your heart. You have a kid, your heart, presumably, for me, for many of us, your heart cracks open. So now this thing, your creativity is where you were putting that like emotion now is here. And so how does that either affect what you do or divide what you do, I think is one. And then the other is like practical resources like time and money. You don't have those practical resources, or you need those practical resources now need to be spread in other places. And so how does that like upend, your priorities or what you create or why you create or if you create? That to me is the most interesting thing. And it's definitely, I mean, in some ways, like we've talked about it, in some ways I feel like it feeds it because it makes you, well, for me, like I felt like my heart opened up a lot when I had kids and I saw the world differently and see the world differently and care about the world in a way I didn't before. But then
it's important that people like you make the work, because like the people who tend to make the work are the people who have all the resources. And they'll get on the talk show and say, wow, it's hard being a parent. My nanny,
Yeah.
And so we get work that's completely warped about that and, lacking in so much.
That's such a good point.
Oh my God, my sister has such rage. She's like, why is every parent so rich on television?
Right.
Like, every home is like, well,
And I made this movie. Okay, here's a funny story. So I made this, my 3rd feature. Then I made this 4th film, which was the 35 millimeter full like film, but we're all live. And that's what like people were interested in seeing. And we brought it to New York, and I really wanted my 3rd feature to get a review in the New York Times. Like that was my goal in life, and people were like, be careful what you wish for. And I worked really hard. The only time in my life I've ever worked to promote anything, I hired a publicist for $1,500, and he got me this full-page review in the New York Times with a giant picture of Megan, and it was like the worst review you've ever read. And relatives are calling him like, saw your review. This guy got fired like 2 weeks later from the Times, so that helps. But he called the main characters yuppies, like spoiled yuppies, and like I was a starving artist making this film on like no money. We were both, and it was about two artists who were struggling to raise their kid and pay the babysitter. Like it was so transparent, you know. And he completely saw us, I assume, through like the lens that he normally watched and saw young white people having kids. Like they must be with their nanny and all. It was infuriating to me. That the other part of it, like the bomb, whatever. But that he called us yuppies, like real. That shows you how long ago it was too. We don't use that word anymore. But that kind of ties in with what you're saying. Like, what lens are you looking through this? Through it when you watch this.
Thanks so much for coming. We've had a great time having you today.
This was the best. It was so nice to meet you.
Oh, it was so nice to meet you. I can see why you like each other.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Coming up next.
So in a way, I feel more creative being in this kind of fuzzy state than maybe I would be if I was functioning at my top.
Next episode, author and storyteller Sofia Stefanovic. Get creative. Go to imstillherepodcast.com to find links where you can rate, review, and subscribe.
I'm still here.